Welcome to Sivako, Road to Avatar. My name is Shaun Alexander and I'll be your guide to the world of Pandora and beyond. To support this show, head on over to www.patreon.com/avatarpod, where you can become a patron and gain access to exclusive content. Joining me today on today's podcast, I'm joined once again by a very special guest who is returning. So, special guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you very much for having me back. I am Jordan King and I'm a freelance film and TV journalist and also massive Avatar fan / Disney Parks fan, which will be handy for this podcast, I think.
Yeah, and you know what? This is a very exciting time to have you on because for those who have listened from the start of this podcast, Jordan was my first ever guest. And you're back, and it's so nice to have you back.
back when the Way of Water still felt like a pipe dream, we weren't sure whether it was actually going to physically appear in front of us or whether it would just be that elusive dream that we were trying to chase.
It really was. We recorded it, I think, maybe the week or two around when the first teaser trailer was released. And I remember it just sort of in this sort of craze of us being like, oh man, it finally feels real. And and yeah, look at us now. We're basically like 10 months ahead of that. And I'm still going, surprisingly enough.
And several viewings of the actual final finished 3 hours and 9 minutes of glory that was The Way of Water.
Oh, yes. So, you know what? Because we've already done the regular questions of when you first saw Avatar, let's talk about when did you see The Way of Water and what was your experience like with that?
So I saw The Way of Water on the night of release. I had been intending to head to the press screening earlier in the week and was absolutely devastated when the train strikes just scuppered my plans at the last minute. But me and my fiance got our 3D glasses and headed down to the IMAX for opening night, and spent 3 hours and 10 minutes just completely and well and truly transported back to Pandora. We laughed together, we cried together, especially during the Tolkien chase. Um, there were so many moments where I either felt an arm on my arm and it just sort of gripped me at a moment of excitement, or it was mine on hers. That by the time we came out of the film, knowing that we would only have one cinema trip together left for the year because we have a very small child and cinema trips are difficult now, we both agreed immediately that we had to go back in as soon as we possibly could.
And you know what? I agree. That's sort of that feeling of being watching it with someone and feeling their reaction. You don't even need to look at their reaction; you can feel it radiating from them. And yeah, my wife, when we went to see it, she was very similar. You know, especially that Tolkien scene that really got to us both. We were a mess by the end of it.
Yeah, and the thing is as well is like it's not even just the first time you see it, like the second time in some ways it's even worse because you know exactly what's coming. And so you notice the relationship between Ronal and the Tolkien, and you know who the specific Tolkien is that they're chasing, and it just makes everything even more unbearable the second time around. Um, and it is, it's cruelly similar to what happens in the real world with actual whale hunting. And I think that for my fiance and I, we both kind of came out of the screening and in the sort of mix of emotions of wonderment and amazement at what we'd seen. We also had quite a long sort of somber conversation about how James Cameron had managed to squeeze in this just absolutely devastating bit of commentary on what humanity's done to the natural world. But yeah, it was, the film as a whole was just exactly what I think every fan of the Avatar series so far had hoped that it would be. It's a transportive experience, and you can't help coming out of it and just thinking, I want to be inside that world again as soon as I possibly can be, for as long as I possibly can be. I'm already because it's still in the cinemas, I'm planning to go again for a third time, and when it eventually is released on home platforms, I can already see the fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on and so forth on the horizon.
Yeah, and I've got a feeling it's going to be one of those films that I can just put on in the background at home at any point and just watch it from any point of the film as well.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's something that you can luxuriate in because of the sort of even more extended than the original Avatar runtime is. You could take that middle stretch of the film when they're learning how to be among the Metcaina tribe. Like, you could just take that in isolation and just, you can imagine just having that on a loop and just sort of finding yourself at the Hallelujah Mountains or heading down into the reef and, just sort of being around all of that incredible flora and fauna. It's such a sensory experience. Um, that we're lucky that the story is as good as it is and that the themes are as strong as they are. But even just taken as kind of like this sort of visual fantasy, it's just something that you think, if I have to exist in the normal boring day to day world, then I can at least have that there as my sort of window into something a lot more exciting.
Yeah. And you mentioned about sort of being wanting to be transported to that world, and that sort of brings us nicely onto our topic of today, which is we are talking about the Disney parks once again, as we did in the first episode, but with a slight twist. What is the twist, Jordan?
So the twist is that you very foolishly gave me permission to come back and to talk about my ideas for expansions to the world of Pandora at Disney World and potentially other Disney parks, and to get stuck back in to the world of Imagineering and try and come up with ways that the Way of Water can be brought into the fold. And I have had a lot of fun engaging my childhood brain and just coming up with all kinds of things that I would really like to see at a Disney park in some time in the near future.
Oh, and I honestly, as soon as I knew I had this idea in my head because I was like, the world of Avatar was so perfect for expansion within the Disney parks. And it felt perfect to have you back on because we had such an in depth discussion in the first episode. I would highly recommend you go back and listen to it because we really had a good time gushing about what's already there. And I felt like it's a great chance for us to look at what's there and what would be perfect to expand upon that maybe in different areas as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, going back to the world of the Disney parks whilst thinking about what I would do with it if I was the one with the keys to the Magic Kingdom or the Animal Kingdom in this case. It's just given me a kind of even more of a sort of reverence and respect for what they've managed to achieve with the world of Pandora at the park so far.
I do want to ask you, have you always like thought of yourself as being like, man, if I had the chance, I would love to become an Imagineer?
I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, where like if you had a list of like dream jobs, then you've got like astronaut and you've got ninja warrior and you've got all of those, a superhero if I had the time. um but like the idea of being an Imagineer, especially if you go on Disney Plus and watch a series like the Imagineering story, it's so hard not to watch something like that and just think, imagine if your whole life was just coming up with ways to make all of that magic exist in the real world. um so yeah, I mean, I think my ideas will probably show you why I am not an Imagineer, but at the same time, it wouldn't be for lack of trying. I definitely I certainly fit the imagine part of the brief, not so much maybe the engineering part.
Oh, well, that's okay. So I feel like I'm in the same boat. My imagination does run wild quite a lot. I love the thought of creating new ideas. And I think something like Avatar, especially what's already there, has proven that you could do so much with it. And yeah, I think it's sort of set an example to other parts such as Universal to try and step up their game and match it.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, all you have to do is you look at the Super Nintendo Land, um, going to Universal Studios, and you look at the fact that Studio Ghibli have entered this sort of theme park arena, albeit in a slightly more sort of calm and relaxed way. But there is this sense now that theme parks have reached such a high level that it really is all about being able to not just go, here's a thrill ride, here's a show, here's a restaurant, but it's like, how can we build a world here? Like, how can we take people from out of their everyday and make them really believe that they're somewhere else entirely? And I think that Disney have always been sort of the trailblazers in that area. And if it weren't for the fact that the world of Pandora exists at Disney, and Disney acquired Fox, and they had the agreement with Cameron as far back as the original Avatar film, you know, the world of Pandora could have been its own massive hundreds of acres theme park, and people would have gone to it in their droves because it is the world that you see it on the screen, and all you want to do in real life after that is find ways to get just a sliver of a taste of what that would be like.
As the guest, I suggest that you should go first. Let's hear your first suggestion.
Okie dokie. So to sort of lay the foundation for the three ideas that I've whittled my pull down to, um, I think that the world of Pandora as it is at the moment, so the floating mountains and the flight of passage that's there, and the Navi the river journey as well. I think that that whole world functions very well as it is, and I think that to be sensible and also to sort of follow the logical route of progression, what you want is, as we move to the sequel, which takes us from the land and the forest and the mountains to the sea, is a water park. So I am suggesting the Met Caina Water Park, which would be situated somewhere on Disney's enormous property, Animal Kingdom, or potentially even as a fixture at Disney Sea over in Asia. Um, but the first, the sort of the foundation, like starting block for my Met Caina water park would be an evolution of the already sort of industry leading and mind blowing Flight of Passage ride, which, if there's anybody that's listening to this that doesn't already know about Flight of Passage, which would be very strange that you're listening to an Avatar podcast, that's specifically about the Disney parks in relation to Avatar. Flight of Passage is like the most immersive ride experience that you can possibly have. Like, you literally uh, on a banshee flying through the mountains of Pandora, and it feels like you are flying through the mountains of Pandora. My idea for the sort of evolution of that, with a water park in mind, would be a more, if it's even possible, a more immersive version of the Flight of Passage. So this would essentially be an underwater version of the Flight of Passage, where guests would be given sort of appropriate breathing apparatus, so snorkels, a gill mantle. I thought would be quite a nice sort of implementation of the customary diving oxygen tanks. The gill mantles being the kind of beautiful like butterfly slash fairy wings that are used in the final act of The Way of Water. But the idea with this ride would be that it's able to take you deep into and far beyond the reef of the Met Caina. So you'd be able to leap up above the water to see the Hallelujah Mountains and Three Brothers and brush shoulders with the Tulkun. But then you'd also plunge far below the Cave of Ancestors to visit the Met Caina Spirit Tree. And so as you're on the actual ride itself, you would be fully submerged for all of the underwater sections of the ride, and you'd actually have that sort of thrilling experience of breaking through into the sunlight to see the Hallelujah Mountains and to see the Three Brothers. Whether that is, an entirely health and safety approved idea at this exact moment in time is definitely a conversation that could be had. But I think that underwater ride tech is going to be a big part of Disney's plans moving into the future. And I think that there are definitely ways, if not, sort of snorkel and gill mantles, as much as that would be the kind of coolest version of it I could think of, you could definitely have, sort of underwater pods or some kind of submersible vessel that would be able to produce a similar effect. But I think that that idea of actually taking visitors into the water and actually, feeling the water surround you, you know, um, sort of living up to the philosophy of the film itself, the idea that, the way of water is this all encompassing thing. Um, yeah, I came out of the film and my fiance and I, the first thing that we both said is, imagine if you could do that at Disney. And I thought, okay, cool, I'm taking a note of that. If I ever get back on Sivako, I'm going to be using that idea. So that's my first idea for the park.
I love that. I love and I think I feel you on how after watching the film, the thing I was most obsessed with was that sort of middle section where we were just exploring the Metkayina clan and their land and seeing so much of the underwater stuff. And also, I think it's got something to do with that high frame rate and how good it looked underwater. Uh, I don't know if was it the same for you that the high frame rate underwater looked just incredible.
Yeah, because it was just that sense of, and it sounds like the really obvious thing to say, but the fluidity of it, the kind of the hyper reality of those underwater scenes, it really did feel, you only had the three dimensions of sort of immersion, but you could imagine yourself there. And so I felt like coming out of that, I thought, the idea of being able to add that fourth dimension to actually have the water surrounding you would be incredible. And the thing as well with my sort of idea of this Flight of Passage re-theme, but an underwater version, is that you could go down the kind of more thrilling route of it being an elu ride, and sort of taming the elu and it flying off at great speed. But then there's also the opportunities there where you could be riding alongside a Tulkun, you could be drinking in the environment, and you could be quite still. And one thing that my fiance suggested, who has got a lot more sensible ideas perhaps than I have, is that you could even have this idea that a pool in the theme park itself, underwater, they could have some iteration of what's being used in a lot of big films now, obviously the volume, and you could have screens that sort of augment the experience with, you might see a skim wing, you might see an elu, you might see a Tulkun, you might see the mantle gills sort of swirling around you in the water. um, and that would be obviously a potential avenue to explore. But I think anything that can take you below the surface and give, from a park design point of view as well, give you that juxtaposition of that sense of the elevation and the sort of the earthly surroundings that you find in the world of Pandora as it is now, and then to take that and then to go into this subaqueous realm, would just be something really cool, and something that my 8-year-old self and also my now 25-year-old self would be very mind blown at getting the chance to do.
Yeah. Oh man, when I think about that, it just sounds so good. And you know what? It kind of relates quite quite heavily to what I had in mind for my first idea, which is very similar. So with yours, you was you thinking a bit more as like a park, as in like a new land, as in like how Animal Kingdom's a separate land, or
Yeah, so it would be, trying to think of the like best way of describing it. It would, I suppose, it would kind of be similar to how in Hollywood studios you have Toy Story Land and then you have Galaxy's Edge.
hmm,
So it's within the Animal Kingdom. So as they both are within Hollywood studios, but they're two lands that function independently of each other. So you might cross some kind of bridge and facade that takes you from one to the other, but you get the sense that you've moved from one part of the world to another distinct part of the world, and then that's its own equally big, equally kind of self-sustaining part of the park.
cool. No, I like the sound of that. That sounds good to me. Yeah, so as I was saying, it's sort of quite a similar vibe to what I had in mind for my first idea, which is that, and some people won't like this because they love this. Um, I want to get rid of Typhoon Lagoon and replace it with the Meccaina village.
Okie dokie, okie
So
dokie.
instead
I
of
can get behind that.
so similar to what you were saying, like I love the vibe, I love how it looks. But I something about the fact that I want it as a full water park, and I just want to turn Typhoon Lagoon, which I think for me is the weakest of the two theming between that and Blizzard Beach. I love the sort of summer winter thing they've got going on at Blizzard Beach.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I mean, let's face it, if the Splash Mountain re-theme is anything to go by, it might be controversial to get rid of Typhoon Lagoon and replace it with something new, but it's also not necessarily a bad idea. Like the Princess and the Frog re-theme for Splash Mountain is by all means a lot cooler. And I think the Met Hyena Water Village would be a lot cooler than Typhoon Lagoon is as it currently stands.
Yeah, and I think it gives you a lot of opportunities to do some interesting things in terms of like the sort of platforms. I love the rope bridges that they walk across in the Mecca village. There's a bit where Took is just bouncing along them, and I just in my head I was immediately like, God, I wish I had something like that. I could bounce along. It looks a lot of fun.
They kind of they remind me that sorry to interrupt. The rope bridges, I can't remember where it's but a slight tangent, but when my fiance and I were waiting for our little one to be born, we were watching TV series that looked at kind of babies from the age of like day one all the way through until they were 3 years old, and but like in different parts of the world. And there was one specific episode that essentially looked at what is ostensibly like a water tribe. So they live on these kind of huts that are just out in the water, and they have these kind of interconnected rope bridges between them. Um, and you have these like 2-year-old kids that are like just very confidently just diving into the water. And so when I saw the way of water and I saw those the bridges and the huts and things, I just kind of had that feeling of I was there like this is like a real this is a real culture, like it's a real way of living, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and I thought in my head when I was sort of envisioning it was that you could do some really interesting things in terms of like combining, because I think at the moment Typhoon Lagoon, certainly for one point, had real animals, not in the same pool as you, obviously, but you could be, for example, be swimming along a certain part, and there'd be a fish tank inside of that pool, so you could see other ones. And I think that's sort of like a nice idea, and I like the idea that it's sort of this connection, like helping to form this connection between ourselves and nature in that way. Um, and I sort of reminded me because I visited Discovery Cove like years ago, and it did a similar thing where you'd have tank and it had like a shark in, but it's not attached to the same tank you're in, thankfully. But it gives that impression. It gives you something to look at a closer angle, in a view you would never have experienced before.
Yeah, that's really cool, and that kind of ties in as well with obviously the kind of like environmentalist themes of the Avatar films as well. This kind of idea of the actual sort of natural way for us to be is to be as close to nature and as intertwined with all the different species as we can naturally be.
Yeah, and right now, so Typhoon Lagoon, the sort of theme for anyone who's not aware is that it's a shipwreck, and it's just covered in sort of like ships, fishing gear, surfboards, all sort of things, all thrown around. And I love the idea of changing it from this sort of like showing of like, oh, this is the sort of like damage that humanity's done to the environment, changing it into like this sort of thing that screams, hey, look at the connection you can have to the environment
Yeah,
instead.
this is kind of the utopian opposite.
Yeah, and I just like the idea. You could still have all the slides and things like that. Why not? It'll be fun. But I just love the idea of like theming it, and I think it would prove to be very popular.
Yeah, and also as well, I think the thing is that like Typhoon Lagoon theming wise, if we're talking about sort of Imagineering and like Disney's way of creating worlds, like Typhoon Lagoon is arguably the most kind of that could be in any theme park anywhere as a water park. Like that could be a sort of budget Portuguese water park that you would go to, or it could be an offshoot of a Haven holiday or something. Whereas like the idea that you've got of the sort of Metcaina village, that would be the kind of experience that you would tell people about and go like, you could only do that at Disney, which is cool.
Yeah. And I just love the idea of it as well, that you could just theme everything within that area. So like the food items and things like that.
Well, if 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 I am able to take advantage of a segue that you've just
Ooh, segue.
well, you've got to use them when they come.
Right, go for it.
So, so kind of feeding into your Metcaina village idea, and you were talking about the rope bridges, which obviously link together the huts, the Marui huts, and then you just sort of touched on food as well. So I had this idea that you'd have, as well as having this kind of flight of passage retheme, which is your kind of big ticket ride element. I know that a big part of the draw of a water park, especially in like a big theme park where you can spend a lot of time, running around doing your 40,000 steps a day and going home with blisters, absolutely exhausted. Part of the sort of joy of a theme park is the ability of a water park specifically is the idea of being able to just chill out and lounge for a while and relax with a sort of nice, still, tranquil pool. I had the idea of having these like luxury Marui hut dining experiences. So basically, you'd be able to. So it'd be there wouldn't be massive availability. So we're talking top of the dining plan here.
Of course.
Um,
We're talking you're not even on a dining plan at that point. You're just
we're
pure cash.
yeah we're yeah we're talking. They turn you away with the dining plan. There's no wearing trainers to the Marui huts. Um, but basically, the idea is that you'd be able to hire out a Marui hut for you and your family, and you'd be able to relax in the shade of a Marui hut by the water, and you'd be given a chance to have this kind of personal one-to-one or one to however many people are in your family experience where you see your meal being prepared using like what would be sort of described to you as sort of traditional Metcaina cooking techniques. So you would have sort of a very highly skilled chef that would be there in front of you, sort of preparing some of the fish or preparing the vegetables over a sort of open fire, and you'd get this kind of like almost story being told to you through the meal that you're having. So this is we're talking about like the level of luxury or sort of exclusivity of like having dinner at Cinderella's castle, obviously,
Mm.
but like the idea that should you so wish, um, you'd be able to like save up and you'd be there like, I had the ultimate Avatar experience. Okay, what was it? Well, we got to actually know what it would be like for a little while to live amongst the Metcaina, to live in one of these huts, to sort of feel the shade on us as we took it in turns to have a dip in the pool, and then we had a human that has intimate knowledge of the Metcaina's cooking methods came and prepared us a meal and talked to us about their culture and talked to us about the relationship between us and the natural world and the sort of give and take of preparing a meal. um, I don't know, there was just something about that idea that just really appealed to me as this kind of, like I say, quite luxurious, but also just very immersive and very personal and very memorable dining experience.
Yeah, you know what? That I can see that already almost in my head, and it would fit in so well within what Disney already do with some of their other dining experiences. So I've got in mind, I think in Epcot within Japan, they have like those sort of experiences where you have a chef in front of you preparing your meal. So that's not something totally out of the world of possibility. But also you have something like you have also like the Polynesian village where they do like a dinner and show experience, which is all
Yeah, so like I went to one of those when me and my fiance were at Disney World, and I'm gonna kick myself now because I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but it was in the Polynesian, and you had like a singer that was singing sort of like Hawaiian folk songs, and then you also had like kebabs and things were being brought to you, and the meat was being cut in front of you and everything, and it just created such a sort of intimate and sort of collegial experience between you and your sort of the other people that you were eating with. And I just thought that, like, in the context of the themes of Avatar and the themes about the cycle of life and death, and I was even thinking, sort of, obviously you wouldn't do it in the meal preparation; it would be a bit strange to you, but like there was something very powerful about seeing Jake teaching his son the value of honoring the life of a fish when they're spearfishing, and that idea that as you have your meal prepared for you, it's a very sort of intimate experience where you're encouraged to kind of not to be put off eating fish or whatever, but to actually take some time to really appreciate that experience and the sort of the sacred nature of the life that provides the meal. So again, feeding into all of the kind of efforts that Disney make, but also that James Cameron through his films have made to kind of put forward that environmentally aware and sort of socially conscious way of living.
Yeah, and Disney's like definitely taking steps to look into their like sustainability, especially in terms of their food. I know some of the, I think it's one of the restaurants in Epcot, they prepare basically, or they grow all their food on site.
Well, yeah, because you can go to. So I did this when I was there in 2019. There's a sort of a slow ride that I get the impression that a lot of families use it as just a way of being able to sit down and have air conditioning for half an hour. But I actually found it very interesting as well. But it's called Living with the Land.
Living with the
Um,
Land is incredible. If people fall asleep on it, they are lame. Guys, it's the best ride going.
but it's just such a sort of eye-opening experience that shows you that whilst it is very easy to sort of see the brand name of Disney and think of these kind of corporate overlords just sort of squishing everything in their path, at the same time as well, like, they're doing vital work to sort of promote sustainability and to increase our awareness of the finitude of our resources as a species. And when you go on Living with the Land and you see the greenhouses and you see that everything from the vegetables, the fruit, to the meat, to the to all of the accompaniments to your meals that you have at Disney, so much of it they try and provide themselves, and that in and of itself is you know their contribution to sustainability. And I think that this idea that I've got, obviously, with the Met Caina, sort of this luxury dining experience, I mean, you could have the luxury dining experience, which is as I've described, but you could also have, sort of supersized huts where there's a central sort of station where things are being prepared, and you could have those stories being told on a sort of slightly less intimate but similarly kind of vital level, where the people that come and serve you the meals just sort of say, so this, we sourced this from here and this came from here, and we want to sort of have a sign of respect for the meal. And you could have like a Navi phrase exchange, or some kind of Met Caina symbology involved with that. But I just think that it would be a really good chance to build on Disney's already pretty impressive, to be fair, reputation for promoting sustainability.
Yeah, and I just love the idea of kind of promoting that, and I feel like Avatar is as good of an opportunity to do that than any film ever is going to have, probably because it's got such a wide reach and because the message is so simple and so clear. I feel.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
All right, so my next one is sort of like a little twofer because I'm using a couple different aspects which are already sort of in Disney. This is related specifically to Florida. Um, and that is that I want to bring back Cirque du Soleil to specifically the Avatar Cirque du Soleil, and I want to bring it to Disney Springs. So back in 2015, they did a Turok the First Flight Avatar Cirque du Soleil show, which ran for 4 years. And yeah, I want to bring it back. Either bring it back as it was, or bring a whole new story to life. which is specifically only for the Cirque du Soleil in Disney Springs. And I think that would like open up such like a nice option of something new to do in Disney Springs. Right now, I think it's called. I think the thing they've got there right now is called Drawn to Life, which is a bit of like a Disney. Here's how we got here sort of story.
Yeah, it's kind of it's nice enough while you're there, but it's also not necessarily something that you're gonna specifically talk about when you get home.
Yeah, I feel like it's quite sort of like a maybe a little bit of a stopgap right now for them. And I haven't seen it myself. It's only been open while I've not been there, so
But I think what you've hit on there, which is quite interesting though, is that like obviously the ideas that we've had so far are kind of meditations on pre-existing themes in terms of like my dining experience. Like you do have the Satuli canteen already at World of Pandora, so like you do have the Pandoran dining experience to an extent, and like the Flight of Passage retheme, we have got the Flight of Passage, but like the idea of having a show, because obviously they still haven't figured out a way of having Navi like walking among you whilst you're in Pandora, and there isn't really like an immediately obvious like stage show that you could do. I think that the Cirque du Soleil thing is probably one of the most interesting different kinds of attractions that you could have, and to make that like a more permanent mainstay would be something really cool.
yeah, so I that's what I kind of had in my head as well was that man, it could sit there for forever basically, and you could keep it changing it as well because there is a lot of possibility for stories here. You know, if for example, if they're like, man, we the let's say Avatar 3 really blows it out of the water, it becomes the highest grossing film of all time. They're like, we are making Avatar 3 into Cirque du Soleil. There you go. You've got like a whole nother like 5 years worth of like show there. And I
Yeah,
think it is
and I
something.
mean as well, like the Cirque du Soleil is so sort of revered for the ability to do what the world of Pandora is doing essentially, which is to immerse you within these different realities and to sort of suspend your disbelief. And like, they could follow along a kind of elemental theme, even if they kind of go a little bit off the plot tracks of Avatar. So, obviously having the first flight of Turk in the show that they'd already done, but then having something that is evocative of taking an elu under the sea for the first time. When Avatar 3 comes around and we discover the Ash people, something with some kind of like fire and sort of volcanic backdrop to it. There's a lot of potential there for like being able to expand to have this like body of work that creates like its own sort of like 5-act story.
Yeah. Something which I now for me the biggest shame right now is that in Disney Springs, the building which once housed Disney Quest is currently being used for absolutely nothing. The the NBA experience was there for a grand total of 2 years, and no one went to it, so they closed it.
Yes.
So, what I want to do is I want to turn that into a sort of avatar experience in itself, which use it as a space where people can design their own avatars and do a VR experience of walking around as their avatars in the world of Pandora. Because I think that would be like an extra accompaniment to having the Cirque du Soleil show there. You get a little two for one there, you know. Disney Springs needs a little bit livening up down that end, I feel like, and Avatar's the way to go.
That would be cool as well, because you get that kind of like the two-pronged kind of experience where you have the kind of the visual feast for the eyes of watching the Cirque du Soleil, and then you get that kind of like more tangible hands-on experience of creating your avatar. I can imagine already like something sort of using VR headsets in sort of a slightly less rudimentary form than like an Oculus or something, but being able to wear a headset and being able to roam around the space that makes you actually feel like you are Navi. And obviously, Disney already have like the kind of the ability to sort of create unique environmental smells and being able to create these really immersive soundscapes. And um, yeah, I think that's a really cool, not like an immediately obvious pairing. Like if you told me that they were two separate ideas, I wouldn't see a link between them necessarily. But then when you pitch them as a joint experience together for a way of sort of giving that area of Disney Springs a bit of a purpose again, like it does actually work as like, okay, I could spend my afternoon doing that.
Yeah, like I could genuinely see Disney Springs, like if you had an double experience like that, becoming like, oh, I could actually spend a good half day doing these experiences at Disney Springs and then follow it on by doing a meal afterwards. Whereas right now, Disney Springs feels very much like there's a couple shops and I could maybe go see a show or go to the pictures, and that's about it.
Yeah, and I mean also as well, if you want to be kind of a little bit cynical business brained about it as well, obviously Disney Springs is one of the few things that you can do, well, inverted commas, do at Disney where you don't actually have to spend money. Like you can just browse and then go home. But like if there was the incentive of an Avatar Cirque du Soleil experience there with this sort of VR element afterwards, like that is your sort of money earner for people going to Disney Springs. It's like, okay, people are going to spend money every time they come here to experience that specifically.
I, I felt quite proud of that one, honestly.
I no, I, it's not only probably the most believable of all of the ideas that we have between us, but it's also one of those things that like until it's said, you probably wouldn't have even thought of it, and then you think of it, and then you go, "Oh, actually, hang on a minute, wait, yeah, that makes perfect sense." Maybe we will. Maybe we could be Imagineers. Maybe
Maybe.
we should. Maybe we should get this podcast. Like we should package it up all nice. We could do a little poster for it. We could send it to Jim Cameron. We could send it to Bob Iger. Like this could be the start of something bigger for us.
Ah, maybe this is the way, yeah. And do you know what it is? It's mostly because I absolutely adored Disney Quest when it was around, and I feel so sad that there's nothing being done with that space anymore.
I
And
never got to experience it because obviously the first time I went to Disney was
oh
2019.
yeah, so you
So
wouldn't.
what was Disney Quest?
So for those who aren't aware, Disney Quest was basically like a giant arcade and technology center. So you would go and play different games, and there was some which were like virtual reality based ones. So I'll list off like a couple of the different game types. There was like a Pirates of the Caribbean game where you were on the deck of a pirate ship, and there was like cannons. You had to shoot the ships off in the distance, which were
Oh
like
wow.
on a virtual screen. There
Okay.
was a design your own roller coaster experience. There was a
Nice.
jungle cruise thing where you're in one of those like fake. It's like going to the
Hang
seaside.
Wait, so you're telling me they got rid of this
Yep, for the NBA experience, which didn't even last 2 years.
and nobody asked for?
Something which is like there's so many incredible things, but one of the best is the fact that they had a Mighty Ducks pinball slam, which is you stand on a giant puck basically and control a pinball as it bounces around a machine, and you're playing against like 11 other people
Oh
on
my
this
god,
giant
that sounds
pinball
like
machine.
absolute carnage.
You honestly look up videos of it afterwards. You're gonna be like, man, I am incredibly annoyed that Disney got rid of this.
I've watched like so many Disney Parks videos, and like I watch all of the like Defunct Land, and I watch the documentaries and stuff. How have I never heard of Disney Quest?
You,
This sounds like this this sounds better than the world of Pandora.
honestly, this was like one of the highlights going to Disney back in the day. This would be like one of the things where I was like, I need to go here again because there's just so much going on. And it's sort of, unfortunately, I think it's because the technology was becoming like obsolete. It was, when it first sort of came around, let me check when it first opened. It opened in 98
Okay,
for the first time. And
yeah.
yeah, and basically a lot of the technology from was from back then as well. Some upgrades here and there, but things were just becoming so out of date that it became a point where they were just like, well, we're just going to close it all because it's too costly for us to even try and replace it.
If only they'd have held out for a little bit longer and looked at what's happened with like film reboots or Lego sequels, and they could have seen the potential in just Disney Quest relaunched and just reskin it all and make it all shiny and new, and they would have known how much people would willingly lap it up. They'd have just held out for a little bit longer and seen that whole wave of here's that thing that you really loved when you were a kid,
Oh,
and we're going to make it shiny and new again.
God, it would have
But
done gangbusters, and it was free. You didn't pay anything extra if you were like a person who went to the parks. It was included, so you didn't pay extra money.
I, I mean, I feel like all of our ideas for the parks, and I still have one more idea to go. I feel like that's all well and lovely, but I feel like my big takeaway from this now is that I've just got this profound sense of FOMO for something that I know I can never have.
Oh, and it's such a shame. Honestly, I can't wait to hear what you think of it when you watch videos.
And honestly, like as soon as I finish recording this, I'm gonna wake up my fiance and I'm gonna tell her that we need to watch Disney Quest videos, and she is gonna. Well, let's hope that she's as enthusiastic about it as I am.
So yeah, what is your final idea?
Okay, well, my final idea to sort of take us back to sort of a slightly more not serious tone, but also not Disney Quest standing on a giant puck tone. Um, but so this again is me kind of thinking about the geography and ideals of Disney World and what Animal Kingdom does, and also my deep love for the conservation station at Animal Kingdom, where you actually get to sort of go to talks from veterinarians where they talk about how they look after the animals there. You're able to go to a petting zoo and pet the donkeys. And like the conservation station was like something that I didn't really know existed until I was there. And then in the space of like an afternoon, I just became very obsessed with it. And I thought it was just an amazing thing that existed. So in my Met Cayena water park, I would like for there to be a conservation reef, which would be so it'd be a sibling to Animal Kingdom's conservation station, and it would be set within a bioluminescent aquarium. So there, you'd basically have what would be presented to you as earth scientists and marine biologists who are there to give talks about endangered species on our planet, as well as to give us opportunities to see some of the fish, flora, and fauna that Disney have been able to give a safe new home to, that are sort of endangered in the wild, as it were. There would obviously be opportunities for kind of close-up demonstrations with some of the sort of like starfish type things and jellyfish and things that you can get close to without obviously being able to touch. But then in addition to having this, what would essentially be like what if Blue Planet, but it was on Pandora. In addition to that, we'd also have, and this again is my child brain coming up with ambitious tech, which kind of exists, but not in the way that I would use it. You'd have like amongst the like clear earth and fish and flora and fauna, you would also have these tanks that are sort of filled with water, but they have holograms of or using holographic technology to be able to give visitors up close experiences with the creatures of Avatar and specifically the Met Cayenne kind of biome. So you'd be able to see a Tulkun up close. You'd be able to see an elu. You'd be able to see the skimwings. You'd be able to see sort of other iconic and beautiful sea creatures from the Way of Water. And, there would be kind of interactive sort of walls next to the tanks where you can kind of find out more information about their habitat and their lifestyle and, what they eat and, sort of how many of them there are known to be still in the wild of Pandora. But this combination of like earthly awareness of our own environment and how important it is for us to protect it, but then also this kind of like immersive side by side look at the environment of the Met Cayena and Pandora, I just thought would be something really cool. And I think this idea of using like holographic technology to be able to project what looks incredibly real, or I mean, you could even use just sort of like screens if that was an easier option to, but sort of screens that are at a lot higher kind of resolution and quality than some of the interactive screens that you find at various like experiences or attractions you go to. Um, but just to give you that kind of immersive experience, I kind of was thinking a tiny bit about the like turtle talk that Crush does, and that kind of element of it having okay, we're talking about something real, but we're including characters or scenarios from imagined worlds that you love. But also just this idea of it all being housed within a bioluminescent aquarium, which would just be very cool because I think one of the few flaws or one of the few frustrations some might have with the world of Pandora is that if you can only go there in the daytime, then you don't get to see all of that bioluminescence that comes out at night, which is incredible. Whereas having this kind of like aquarium within this, sort of like almost cave setting, you'd be able to have that kind of like eye popping, eye catching bioluminescent experience at any time of the day. So yeah, Conservation Reef, a sibling to Animal Kingdom's Conservation Station.
You know what? I love that idea because something that is missing, it feels like, from Animal Kingdom is that sort of focus on the water. And because all sorts of other animals are sort of like covered in this park, aside from, yeah, water life. So I think this would be a great way to do it. And I love the idea of being able to experience that bioluminescence any time of the day because I would just love to be able to do it like first thing in the morning.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that like it's a consideration as well for like parents of small children and like as a dad now to a young child, like I know that you get towards the end of a day and like I recently took my little one to Disneyland Paris and you get towards, even just early evening and they're flagging and it's like, okay, how realistic would it be to keep a 4 or 5 year old child up until 7 o'clock at night so that it's dark enough that they can see Pandora lit up? Like if there's this kind of hub that you can go to where it's like, okay, you're going to learn something here, but also look how cool the bioluminescence is. Like you get that nice combination of like, okay, so this is like a sensory kind of experience that you can really drink in and enjoy, but then at the same time you're also like being encouraged again to like connect with the world that's around you, to acknowledge the vast amount of life that does live under the sea. Like I was doing a sort of a cursory look into bioluminescent fish and sort of sea creatures, and there's over 15,000 species of bioluminescent sea creatures, and like we only ever really hear about maybe 4 or 5 of those. um so yeah, I thought it would just be a quite, to use a corporate term, quite a synergistic approach to bringing together some of the best loved elements of Pandora and also Animal Kingdom, and then my own beloved conservation station, and then bringing it to something that feels distinctly fitting and of a piece with the Met Hyena.
Yeah, totally. I could see that, and I love the idea as well to because I feel like zoos love when I think of the zoos in the UK, they always have one section which is like, oh, we're about to go inside and we're about to see the dark section where it's all lit up. And that works perfectly for something like Pandora because guess what? That's just how it looks on there. And I think it just fits perfectly.
Yeah, and the difference with the Pandora version would be like it would actually be really, really cool.
Yeah, it wouldn't just be a dark box.
It wouldn't just be a dark box that quite often is a bat cave that just smells like batwing.
Yeah, that's something you won't find in in Pandora quite as much.
Although that being said, it does give them opportunities to explore what smells do a Tolkien make. What does an elu smell like? Which could be quite an interesting experiment.
Man, I kind of like that idea of being like, what's the other sensory experiences of Pandora that you wouldn't normally think of? Yeah, like what does everything smell like?
But also as well, like that's the kind of, it is that's the added dimension that even James Cameron and all of his technical wizardry probably isn't going to be able to do unless smell-o-vision is the big innovation for Avatar 3. But like that ability to appeal to that sense, the sense of touch and the sense of smell, like that is a specific thing that your park experience of Avatar can give you that your film experience. I mean, don't get me wrong, you feel like you could reach out and touch it, and you feel like you can get as close to it as possible when you watch the films, but like you can actually do it in the parks. And that even extends to like the restaurant idea and things like you can get a taste of another world, and you know you can take that immersion a step further, because with a world as rich as Avatar is, people are always going to want to just get more of it. Like I want it to fill my nose, I want it to fill my ears, I want it to fill all of my senses.
Mm, yeah, that's something that Avatar offers, especially Pandora right now, and I want it to offer more of that moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
So yeah, for my final one, I'm actually going away slightly from Avatar, the in-world experience. I'm looking more at the Avatar, the experience of creating the movies of Avatar, and that's that um something that I loved about Hollywood studios back in the day was the backlot tour and the sort of aspect of what it's like behind the scenes of making a movie. Nowadays, Hollywood Studios is very much like, "Hey, look, we own Star Wars, we own Toy Story, so visit their lands." But I something I love is the idea that you can go behind the scenes and see how something like Avatar is made. So what I would do is scrap what is currently known as Star Wars Docking Bay, which is a whole section of the park which currently I think just houses a few props and a few meet and greets. Move that can go somewhere else. That can go Star Wars Land, and put there a sort of experience similar to what they used to do for the backlot tour, which is that you'd see how the movie like Avatar is made, and specifically how the technology is made, or how they use the technology to make the film. So you can see that process. Because I would find it so fascinating. I think a load of other people would too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's like again, that's just a really good idea as like another lens through which to view the experience of Avatar. Like so many people are, whether you're like a sort of dyed in the wool cinephile or whether, you just like Avatar because you like the alien world of it all. I feel like everybody just has a curiosity about the way that films are made. And because everything in Avatar is so just like magical to look at, I feel like actually being able to get under the skin of all of that and sort of into the journey that it took to get to the point where they can make the films the way that they do. I feel like that's got such a big appeal, and obviously, like when you're working with a pioneer like James Cameron, the potential for that to be expanded as the films go on, and as a almost like they could be doing behind the scenes stuff specifically for this show slash attraction, like whilst they're filming 3, 4, and 5, or whilst they're doing post production on 3, 4, and 5, like there's a real opportunity there that you have that kind of like only at Disney World can you see this, like only here can you get this close to what it's actually like to make a film like this.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me as well of they used to have different elements, and I've taken this from a few different rides. So specifically, the backlot tour used to have an experience where they would bring someone from the audience up and make them experience basically a ship getting hit in a storm, and they'll just start throwing buckets of water at you, like the old fashioned filmmaking. And I kind of love the idea of them having like someone from the audience come in and play a part acting in it. So, for example, they might interact with someone who's in one of the sort of like the capture suits, who's playing. So, for example, I know that for when they play a human-sized person next to an avatar, they'll have the avatar's head on top of the other person's, like a good 2, 3 foot higher. And I love the idea of just having someone walk out with that on top and seeing the height difference, but also we know that we can see like real time rendering of these shots. So why not show some of that to audiences and see how it's done? Because I think people would just be going like their minds would be blown from it because it's like, how does this work? How have you been able to achieve this?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well there is that element that like when you watch a behind the scenes documentary or like YouTube clips or things that are shared on social media, like even when you actually see it like there in front of you, even when you see what's actually happening, it's still hard to actually believe it or to like get a real sense of it. So the idea of actually watching somebody in real life right in front of you get a little taste of that immersion into that world and like, okay, so this is how that face gets mapped onto that and this is how this happens. Like I feel like that would be like a proper kind of mind blown experience.
Now, practically, I don't know how easy it is to organize something like that. There's probably so many things that would have to be going through like legal loopholes because I'm just thinking in terms of like, for some reason I went straight to the in my mind Willy Wonka, where he brings in people when he has to get to sign a big old contract to say you won't steal my technology. And I sort of get the similar vibe you'd have to do that because obviously like Weta are like so far ahead of the game in terms of like their tech.
But what they could even do though is kind of like a sort of more sort of like slightly comical approach, but also to sort of emphasize how far we've come. Is like they could have they could have the audience participation be for like something that shows where that technology was even 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and it is literally the ping pong balls, and it's like this sort of rudimentary 3D CG shape, and it's like, okay, so this is what we were doing in 2005. This is what we can do in 2000, by 2025, and you can kind of like, because in that sense you wouldn't necessarily probably jump through as many loopholes with the technology permissions and stuff, because using older tech is probably going to be less prohibited than using the cutting edge stuff that they're working on now.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it, and having that actual comparison in front of you would be amazing to see.
Yeah, because I mean the thing is, it's really easy to forget, like, because of how fast we're like the landscape of the industry is changing. Because it's changing so fast, it's easy to forget how far we've come, because it feels like we're just going further and further, even faster and faster. But like, I look at a film that I don't know, something that I loved when I was a kid, like Spy Kids 3D, or I look at even something like a blockbuster like Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. And like Star Wars Revenge of the Sith is one of my favorite films and has been since I was a child. But like, the effects in that film just aren't on a comparable level to what you can achieve in Avatar now. Or if you watch Spy Kids 3D, which you used to watch with the paper glasses that were in the DVD case that had the red and the blue filter, like the leaps and bounds that technology's come in the time since, and a lot of that because of what James Cameron's done. Um, having something to like chart that evolution to arrive at the Way of Water, and then Avatar 3, 4, 5. I think that would be really cool, and it would also be like a distinctly modern update on that old backlot tour, or the what was it that they used to have in Disneyland Paris, the great movie train or the great movie
Oh,
ride or
I mean,
something
because
like
yeah,
that.
they used to have the great movie ride in the Hollywood studios as well, which I absolutely
Yeah,
adore and miss.
which had like scenes from Casablanca and Indiana Jones, and all of these iconic moments in cinema history. But like cinema history is being made on an almost year by year basis now, so there'd be a really good like constant work in progress for people to go and see, of like, okay, this is where we're at now, this is how far we've come since then.
Yeah, and if you're gonna have like a movie like Avatar be at the forefront of technology, why not use it to showcase it?
Yeah, definitely. And also as well, you have the added thing of like, you watch that and you see how they're able to bring it so close to feeling like it's real on a screen. And then you would literally step out of that experience and you'd be there like, oh look, I've literally stepped out of feeling like I'm in Pandora, and I'm in Pandora.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. You could have that experience and be like, "Yep, I can see how they did it."
Yeah, and I think it would increase your appreciation for both for the Imagineering side of things and for the film side of things, because the lines between the two experiences will just get thinner and thinner.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's been such a pleasure. Yeah, where's the best place for people to find you?
So you will find me on Twitter at Jordan MB King, and then from there you can find links to all of my work for Empire and Movie Marker and Why Now, and as of very recently, I've started doing some bits for Yahoo as well. So yeah, all of that stuff and my uh, bad dad jokes and film hot takes can be found on my Twitter. So that's probably the best place to go if you didn't listen to an hour of me babbling on now and think, oh my God, I never want to hear from this guy again.
And yeah, please go check back on our first episode. It was so much fun talking about all that was already at the parks at that time. But yeah, if you've got any other ideas, send them through to us. I want to hear them. Come on, throw them my way. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. Hope you have an amazing day and speak to you all again soon. Goodbye. Thank you for listening. This week's episode is dedicated to our patrons Eric Scrock and Patrick Regal. To become a patron, visit www.patreon.com/avatarpod.